Okay, guys, so we're live. Can you please confirm whether you can hear me okay? I'll just wait until. Hi, Ryan. Yes, okay. Good. Okay, guys, well, I'm starting 5 minutes early because of the link change. I'm sorry for that. I found that YouTube changed their encoder setup, and I did a test and it didn't work, right? So I had to go in and create a new link and share that link everywhere and so forth, right? So I'm going to start with the actual session in 5 minutes. So you guys have the time to get a cup of coffee, get a cup of tea, whatever you want, a drink if you like, and yeah, and then we'll get started in a few minutes, right? Now, keep in mind, guys, that this is going to be a pretty complicated, technical, and elaborate session. Okay, it's not going to be as much fun as 3D modeling stuff and so forth. Nevertheless, it's going to be very, very, very important. I decided I'm going to do this one time and one time only. So I'm going to talk about a lot of stuff. Make sure you guys have the opportunity to track it back, to write it down, to note it on your laptop or on a piece of paper or whatnot, because I am going to cover a lot. All right. Okay, so any questions before we get started? I'm going to start in about, I would say, 4 minutes, right? So, how was my day? Well, my day was pretty great, actually. Unfortunately, I had this whole YouTube situation. So, I've basically been spending the last hour fixing that. So, Technical Tracker is asking me what am I going to be doing in this video? Well, what I'm going to be talking about is contracts. So contracts related to 3D artists, 3D artists that work freelance, or 3D artists that work on projects for studios and so forth and so on. So I'm going to be going through all of that contractual language, what you should include in a contract, what you should not include in a contract, what type of contracts are out there, and so forth and so on, right? So, like I said, it's going to be pretty tough. It's going to be a lot of technical stuff. But if you ever deal with this, then, okay, so Santosh is saying, let's get started. I'm not going to get started yet because this is a scheduled streaming session to start at 8 CET. That's in 2 minutes. So I want to give people time to get on board as scheduled, right? I just got on board a little bit early so you guys can set up things and so forth. So 2 more minutes, guys. So Mental Death saying, how many times will I be here? Do you mean streaming live? I do that on occasion. Normally it's pretty spontaneous and I wouldn't be doing it scheduled because of the topic of this video, which is a very, very important one. That is the reason why I did schedule it and why I'm waiting for another 2 minutes before we get started so everybody can get on board if they like, right? Okay, so for the next 2 minutes or 1 minute, any questions before we get started? Just curious, Henry Shervenka, are you online yet? Thanks, buddy. Okay, guys, I guess a few more seconds and then we'll get started officially. Like I said, again, we're going to be talking about contracts, right? Now, for those of you who don't know, I have a very, very, very extensive and long background in international contracting. I did that for a long time as a career, both in services and products. So I'm going to be covering a lot of that stuff. Let's see, by now it's officially 8 o'clock CET, so we're going to get started. All right. So I'm going to be looking over to that side because I got a lot of notes that I need to cover. What I do not want to do is answer questions during this because that would make it way too complicated. So I'm going to try to go through all the notes I have, and I'll give you guys the opportunity to ask questions, okay? Right. So first of all, for those of you who don't know this, and you probably saw this in the thumbnail, there's a BenQ logo up there. I'm a BenQ global ambassador, which basically means that BenQ supports me when I do stuff like this. So this is a BenQ sponsored video. Thanks for that. That doesn't necessarily mean that they pay me loads of money, but just that they're involved, right? Okay, so BenQ, thanks for your support. As far as language is concerned, obviously this session is going to be in English, right? And I do understand that a lot of you guys do not have English as your primary language, okay? Now, contract language is complicated for people that are native English or American, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and explain things in the simplest way possible so I make absolutely sure that everybody understands, right? Okay, let's see. As far as the contract topics, now I can talk about contracts for a month without repeating myself, right? It is extremely complicated and it will never cover everything. So I'm going to try to cover everything that I think is relevant for a 3D artist. And at the end, when I'm done, you guys can ask me questions, okay? Now make sure you got a notepad or a laptop or something to make notes, because I'm going to go pretty fast to cover a lot of stuff. And that way you can write it down and remember it, okay? I'm going to do this one time only because it is something that a lot of people have been asking me to cover. I normally do this in sessions where I basically ask $50 an hour to do this. So for you guys, like I said, one time only, this is completely free, right? Now, the purpose of this video is not for you guys to become a lawyer. The purpose is for you to have a better understanding of contracts that will help you to read contracts whenever you are confronted with them, let's say by a client or whatnot. And if you have to set up something that looks like a contract, you have a bit of a better understanding, okay? Let's see. Well, like I said, this session is completely free. However, if you feel the urgent need to do a small donation, I'm just typing in my PayPal account here for those of you who want to, right? And if you decide to do so, that's highly appreciated. Now, as far as this session is concerned, and Martin is asking this question, will this be posted later on the channel? It will not, right? This is the only session. If you don't see this, you're going to miss it, unless you're a patron. I decided a while back that live streams, after they went live, will only be available for my patrons because they support me financially every month. And I think it's more than fair to have perks for them, right? Okay, so let's see what else we got. Okay, well, before we get started on the contract stuff, a big disclaimer here. This is important to protect myself. Now, I have a lot of experience with this stuff. I have the urgent need to share this with you guys because I think it can be helpful, but I don't want you guys to sue me, right? So the disclaimer here is this. Anything you use based on this video is at your own risk, and I cannot or will not be held liable or responsible for any consequence of that, right? It's kind of a legal thing, but I have to say that because if you do something wrong in the contract and you go bankrupt and you sue me, I don't want that to happen, right? Okay, so that said, here we go. All right. So what is a contract to start with? Well, a contract is a legally binding written or verbal agreement between two or more parties or legal entities, and it needs to be illegal, right? Where one person promises to deliver a product or service and the other person promises to pay for that. Now, let me explain that, right? First of all, legal binding. What does that mean? Well, it means that whatever you agree, whether verbally or in writing, has to be legal. So if you put in writing something that is illegal, it is not a valid contract, right? So keep that in mind. Now, then it says a verbal agreement or a written agreement. Now, preferably you would want a contract in writing, right? Because you cannot argue about what's in writing. If it's in writing and it's signed by all parties agreed, right, it's easier. But don't be mistaken here. A spoken or a verbal agreement with witnesses is equally legal, right? So keep that in mind, right? Okay, and then the next one, it says parties or legal entities. What does that mean? Well, you can have a contract between two people, right? Person to person. But you can also have a contract between a person and, let's say, a company, right? So let's say you as a 3D artist get hired by Nike to do a project, right? And you're talking to, I don't know, some guy called John Williams, whatever. The contract you're signing is with Nike, not with John Williams. He is setting a signature. If he leaves the company and somebody else takes his job, right? It's still a legal binding contract because you signed a contract with a company, not with a person. Big distinction there, okay? Right, and then of course it is a product or a service or a combination of both. Now, as I move forward, think about this. When you're creating a 3D model for, let's say, a client, right? Are you delivering a product or a service? And what's the difference? Well, the thing is this. A service is typically paid for per hour because you're delivering a service. A product has a fixed price. So if you're delivering and asking for a fixed price, you're selling a product. If you're asking for the hours that you're working on it, you're selling a service, okay? All right, so what else? So what can you agree on? Well, basically, you can contractually agree on anything, right? The fact that you have a contract with a client doesn't mean that you did a good deal, right? I can, for example, sign a contract with you that you will work for 1,000 hours and I will pay you $1, right? Now, that is not illegal. So if you are stupid enough to sign that, right, we have a legally binding contract. You have to work 1,000 hours for $1. So there's a difference between having a legally binding contract and a good contract, right? Keep that in mind. All right. Okay, so let's see what else. So what can you agree on? Anything that is not illegal. So if you put something in writing in the contract that's illegal, right? For example, you're a hitman or whatever, and you want somebody to shoot somebody or whatnot, that's clearly something that's illegal, right? Therefore, even if you put that into a contract and sign it, it is not a valid contract, okay? Keep that in mind. And then the next thing is this. If you agree on something that is illegal at a higher law level, and I need to explain that, okay? Let's say in your village or your city, there's a law that allows you to do something, but on a state level or on a country level, it's illegal, okay? That means that you cannot agree on something in a contract that is against a higher law. I hope that makes sense, okay? All right, so let's go on. Okay, I'm getting questions about Maya. I'm not going to get into that. All right, so types of contract. Now, I talked a little bit about this already, right? So you're delivering a product, a service, or both, okay? Now, what defines a product when you are a 3D artist? Because typically you're not driving over to your client and giving them a cardboard box with products in there, right? But the 3D model that you make and the digital files that you send them, right? Is this considered a product or not? Well, that depends on how you put that in writing in the contract. If you accept an offer from Nike, for example, right, to create a 3D model of a new training shoe, right, and you send them a model and you say, okay, you're going to pay $5,000 for that model. Basically, you are selling a product. If you're going to say, okay, you're selling that file and it took you 10 hours and you're going to ask 5,000 for that, then you are selling a service, right? Okay, big difference there. Now, when you are talking about delivering a service, then in contractual terms, you talk about an SLA, which stands for Service Level Agreement, right? The SLA describes what is a good service. How quick do you need to respond, and so forth and so on. And that entire document is called an SLA, but I'll get back to that later, right? Okay, so let's see. When it comes to contracts in general, when do you need one, right? Why would you create one? Why would you have one? Well, first of all, most people hate contracts. It's kind of like an insurance policy. You don't want to talk about it because it's boring and it's legal and all that kind of stuff. However, if you work as an independent 3D artist and you work without contracts and you get into a situation where a client says that they don't want to pay you and you're in big, big trouble, right? Then you have to deal with that. And if you got a contract, you're protected, okay? All right, so let's see. And the contract, by the way, can be anything between 3 lines written on a napkin or 200 pages written by 50 different lawyers, right? And it's kind of up to you to decide what's applicable for you. And that's what I'll get into next, okay? So when do you need or when do you want a contract, okay? Now, typically you want a contract when you are not willing to accept the risk or the exposure. I'll give you an example. Let's say a customer, a client hires you to make stuff, and they'll say, okay, you're going to work for me for 6 months, and then after 6 months, I'm going to pay you. You cannot take that risk, because if they don't pay you after those 6 months, you have a huge problem, and you're probably going to go bankrupt, right? So you're going to want to have a contract in place with language that describes exactly, what your position is and what their position is, and so forth. Okay. What is the other reason for a contract? Let's say you don't necessarily want a contract, but your client or customer insists that they want a contract. That can be a situation as well, right? And then the last one is when the potential reward outweighs the time, effort, and cost, okay? So if it's fairly simple to put the contract in writing, and you can do it quickly and you're protected that way and it doesn't cost you a lot, why wouldn't you, right? All right, okay, let's see what else. Okay, we're going to get into the process of how to set up a contract. Now, before we do that, I'll take a couple of questions. So any questions about what a contract is, what types of contract there are? Okay, I'll give it a sec. All right, so I don't see a lot of questions coming. So we're going to get into, let's see here. All right, how to set up a contract. Okay, there are some questions. Let's see, can we make contract on our own terms and conditions for freelance artists? A question by Shivam. Yes, you can, but first of all, a couple of things. Like I said, it has to be legal, right? So you can't make up terms that are illegal, right? It has to be terms that are acceptable by the other party, because if the other party never signs it, you don't have a contract, right? But in principle, you can. Now, I wanted to address exactly what you were saying, right? So let's go into that. So the process of how is a contract created to begin with, okay? So what happens is this, and I think Will is asking that question as well. Discuss negotiation, being able to show work in your portfolio. All right. So how do you get to a contract to begin with, right? So you get contacted by a client or a customer and say, hey, can you do this and this for me or whatnot, right? Now, what you're going to say is, okay, give me more details, give me specifications, and find out exactly what they want, right? And then based on that, what you're going to say is, I'm going to send you a quotation, or in other words, I'm going to send you a price. I'm going to tell you how much money I want, right? Okay, now it's possible that the client's going to say, well, that's too much money, or I don't agree, and that's where your negotiation process starts. Now, from your point of view, you need to understand your market, right? How many 3D artists are in your area or are competing with you in this project? Do you know how much money they're asking? Are you better, same, or worse than these people? And so forth and so on. Now, this is going a little bit away from the contract topic, but basically that's what happens. Now, what usually happens, that's the first step in the contract negotiation, is either you or the customer has some text lying around with some terms and conditions on a piece of paper, right? And usually one of the two parties will come up with what is best for them, right? So if the client sends you a contract, everything in there is beneficial to them. Otherwise, they wouldn't send it, right? So it's typical that you wouldn't agree with all of this stuff. So what happens is they will send you a Word document and say, okay, here's my proposal. You'll read through the Word document and you will start to propose changes. I want that discount level to be lower. I want that hourly rate to be higher. I want the payment term to be shorter. And you send that back to them. So that's revision 1, revision 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, whatever. Worst case scenario. At some point, you have an agreement that you both find the document acceptable. That's when you go in and sign it, right? Let's see. How can I contract to be awarded to a freelance that is yet to be under a legal association? Let me see if I understand that question. As a freelancer, how can a contract be awarded to a freelancer that is yet to be under a legal association? Okay, so basically you're saying that a company wants to award a contract to a freelancer that is not set up shop yet as a legal entity. Is that what you're asking? Disney, he's influencer, attorney, specialist. Okay. Okay, so Will saying, good to know. It's normal to volley contracts back and forth. Of course. I mean, what you're looking for is a mutual acceptable agreement, right? It's never going to be a contract that you agree with from the start. And how that usually happens from a negotiation point of view is the person that is selling, in this case you, right, the 3D artist, you want the maximum amount of money, right? The client wants to pay the minimum amount of money. Now you have a bottom line, what you have to make. They have a bottom line, what they're willing to pay. That is the negotiation space between the two. And you don't negotiate based on, I want a lower price. You negotiate based on why you want a lower price. And you use arguments for that. So if you ask for a certain amount per hour or for the project, and they're going to say your price is too high, you can say, well, I got more experience than the other guy. I have, better results than the other guy. I work faster, and so forth and so on, right? Okay. So that's kind of how the process works. So draft version, version 1, revision 2, revision 3, until you have a final signed contract. How that usually happens is one party signs, sends 2 copies to the other party. They sign both copies and send back 1. So you both have a copy that has 2 signatures, right? That's how that works. All right, let's see. All right, Kate. So what do you need to put into this document? Well, to begin with, you need to put a date on it, right? That's pretty important, because if you run into a contract without a date, you don't know if it's still valid or not. I mean, has it been signed in 1971, in 2007? You have no idea. Now, this may sound trivial, but it's very important. Okay, so Michael is saying clients don't want to sign SLAs. Well, let me address that quickly. An SLA, or service level agreement, is usually something that you will do when you are working with the client long term, right? So you wouldn't do that for one project. But let's say you are kind of the go-to guy for all their project. You've been working with that client for years, right? Now, what you would do is you would sign an SLA and say, okay, ongoing for every project that we do, we're going to sign one SLA that kind of covers how we work together, right? And you're right. If you have one deal or one project going on, then you wouldn't do that, right? Okay, so Archive is asking, what made you bring up this topic? I got a call or a chat message, and later on a call with a 3D artist, somebody in my network that was completely freaking out because they were working for a client for 5 months, and the client said, no, I'm not going to pay you one penny, and I'm going to go to somebody else. And my first question was, do you have a contract? And his answer was, no. And I thought, well, if this is going on in the 3D world, then you guys might be in a lot of trouble. So that's why I came up with this, right? Okay, so hopefully that answers your question. So let me see. So we got a date. We need a location. Now, why is a location important? Because the location of where the document has been signed, right, can be extremely important for the applicable law, right? So let's say I'm in the US as a 3D artist, and I'm signing a contract with a company or a client in Japan, right? Now, based on the location, if it's not described in another way, how do we know what courts to go to if we get a conflict, right? So we need to talk about applicable law, and I'll get to that in a minute, okay? All right, so reference. Let's say you sent a quote to a client, right? And you said, okay, for the next 6 months, I'll work for you. This is the amount that I want per month, and so forth and so on, right? And you decide to put a contract together for that, okay? Then what would happen is in the reference of the contract, you would refer to that quotation or that offer number. So you know what the basis of the contract is, okay? Let's see what else. Okay, so define the parties. What does that mean? Well, it's a contract between who and who, right? I mean, you're going to need to put in there who you are, and they're going to put in there who they are. Now, that may sound simple. You can say, okay, so I'm Mike and he's Jim or whatever. But I talked about legal entities. You can have a contract with a company, not with a person. And what company is that? And is it a subsidiary of that company, and so forth and so on? So you clearly need to start in the beginning of the document saying, this is a contract between Mike, party number 1, and Nike, party number 2, represented by sales manager, blah, 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 whatever, and so forth. And then what they usually do in the contract is they say, from here, further on in the document, we're going to refer to Mike as the seller and refer to Nike as the buyer. So they don't have to repeat that all the time. Okay. Let's see. Quick question here. If I work for a US company as a freelancer and I'm in another country, should they make me a different contract? Well, the thing is this. If you are an independent 3D artist, right, then you have probably a VAT number to pay taxes, and you have a legal identity or identification number for your business, right? So if you are a resident of the US and you went to the Chamber of Commerce in the US and you registered your company, then your company is an American company, right? So even if you're sitting on the beach in Italy, they are still dealing with an American citizen that pays taxes in America, has a registered company in America, and so forth and so on. So please let me know if that answers your question, okay? All right, let's see. So we know about the people or legal entities. Now, what if you got more than 2 parties? What if you got 3 parties? What if you have a client that went to a design agency and a design agency called you as a 3D artist, right? That makes things complicated, right? So because who is responsible for what? And you need to be very careful with that, because sometimes you got 2 parties and these 2 parties each have sub parties working for them. So if I can't handle the workload on a project and I ask you as a second 3D artist to help me, right? Do I have a contract with you, or do you have a contract with them? You see what I'm saying here? Let's see, quick question here. I made a project for my former professor. I didn't have a contract, and he said there is need for a contract. I finished the project and he's no longer responding. Okay, So I assume you're saying that he said there is no need for a contract. Well, I don't know the exact circumstances, but I kind of guess you have a big problem right now. And there's not a lot you can do unless you can prove that you have witnesses that heard you make this verbal agreement and they can testify to that and so forth. Yeah? Rain is saying, is a contract the best way to go as a freelance artist? Absolutely. Okay, so let me see where we're at. Okay, so we talked about legal entity. The next one is definitions. Now, in a contract, you always have a section called definitions. And basically, this explains words used in the contract, right? So they will say the word buyer means the person buying the stuff. The word seller means the person selling stuff. It sounds really trivial, but that's what that is. So it's just definitions. Now, okay, so I'm seeing some questions that are totally not relevant here. The next one is maybe the most important topic of all when it comes to contracts. Okay, so pay attention to this one: the scope or statement of work. Right. So you have a client, you have a contract, and you're going to describe what the client is expecting from you. So you need to write down what you're going to deliver. Okay. So what is the description of what you're going to do? I'm going to make you a character. Okay. I can make a character in 2 minutes, right? I can make a character in 200 hours. So what is the exact definition? I will make you a character that is riggable in a way that can be applied in a situation like so-and-so. It has a texture map of at least 2K per section. The topology is this and that and so-and-so. So the more specific you get, the better understanding there is of what is expected. The absolute number one biggest problem is miscommunication between 3D artists and the client. The client has an expectation, you have an expectation, there's a mismatch, and there's a conflict, right? They are not satisfied, they don't want to pay, you're pissed off, you're not getting any money, and you have a conflict. So the scope or statement of work needs to contain, one, what are you going to deliver? And be as specific as possible and have both parties agreed, right? So what needs to be done? When does it need to be done? How does it need to be done? And most important of all, when do both our parties agree that it has been done, right? So you need to build in checks. Okay, when I do this and this and this, you need to sign off that you're okay with that. When I do so-and-so, you need to sign off that you're okay with that, and so forth, right? Okay, then response times. Let's say you got a contract and okay, you're going to work on something for me for 6 months. We signed a contract. 2 months later, I heard nothing, right? I get worried. Now, what you do is you put in writing response times. You will communicate to me once a week on progress. I will communicate to you once a week on status of payments or whatnot. You keep each other informed, and that way you don't get worried. Right? Let's see, any quick questions here before I move forward? If you want to make a co-production for a 3D animation with another person from another country, what kind of contract should we make as independent people? Right. Okay, well, first of all, if you are working on something together, right, there's not a buying and selling relationship, right? You're working on something together to sell that together, right? Kind of different situation. But what you would do is you would put in writing, again, scope of work, who's doing what and who will get what, right? So that would be a collaboration contract. Now, I didn't mention this though, but there are of course different types of contracts. You got a buy-sell contract, you got a collaboration contract, but for example, you also have a labor contract. Let's say you're not working freelance, you're working as an employee, a 3D artist employee for a studio. You might still have a contract. But in this case, you are protected more, right? For the simple reason that there are labor laws in countries. I can, in a product contract, I can ask you to, work 1,000 hours for $1, and if you sign it, you're screwed. In a labor contract, I can't do that because it's illegal. And like I said, you cannot agree to something that's illegal, right? Let's see. Have you found that with larger companies, they become less willing to negotiate on contract terms such as payment schedule unless their name? Yeah, of course. So Will is asking this question, and the thing is, this is kind of the David and Goliath situation, right? And that's not always only the case with 3D artists, but that's the case with every company in the world. If I don't know, if I sell, I don't know, business cards, right? Let's say that's my business. I sell business cards, and I got 2 employees, and I have the opportunity to sell to a company with 50,000 employees. They got all the power. They got all the leverage. I will do whatever they want. I will jump through every hoop they want, right? Now, that's the same with 3D artists, specifically with 3D artists, because most 3D artists that work freelance are single people, solo, right? So you don't have any power. Now, you need to find a balance between protecting yourself and having a job, right? Because if you are really strict about everything and you always want a contract and you're going to be putting pressure on clients, you're not going to have any clients, right? Let's see. Emma is saying, do you have any good or bad example freelance contracts somewhere we could look at together? I do not. Well, I do, but I do not, because whenever you're talking about freelance contracts, these are typically protected by NDAs or non-disclosure agreements, and I'll get to that in a second, right? Okay, let's move forward because we still have a lot of stuff to cover, right? So scope of work, like I said, right? What needs to be done? When does it need to be done? How does it need to be done? And when is it considered done? And then you have the response times and how to communicate them, right? Okay, the next big one that people fall flat on their face every time, and that is changes, okay? So you agree on that you're going to make something, and the customer comes up and says, well, can you change this? And then 2 days later, can you change that? And then a week later, can you change that, right? Now, your deadline is moving and moving and moving, and you're waiting longer and longer and longer for your money, right? And you're wondering when they're ever going to stop doing that. So what you need to do is in the initial scope of work, you need to describe exactly when it is considered finished, right? You also need to include how many changes the client may make. So you can say, okay, the initial project is including 3 changes. And then you also need to decide what is a change, okay? If they want you to take the park bench and turn it from green to red, that's not a change. If they want you to specifically change the design, that is a change. So what you would typically do is say, I'm going to offer you an amount of money that you have to pay me for this project, and in return, I'll make the project as defined in the scope of work, including 3 changes. And a change means this, 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 or this. After that, any additional change will cost you so much and will be invoiced and so on. And then also you need to discuss what will this do to your project deadline. If you need to have everything done within 1 month and they come up with changes and changes and changes, you're going to miss your deadline, right? So what you do is you agree to the deadline, including 3 changes, and you say any more changes will have an effect on the deadline and we'll move that out without any penalty from me, okay? Let's see. Okay, all right, so we're going to go to the next topic here. So changes, we talked about that. What is considered a change? How many changes are included in the price that you quoted originally? What is considered extra? And how much money are you going to ask for that, right? And will extra changes have an effect on the deadline? Okay. Right. Next one, payment terms. I assume when you work for a client, you want to get money. You want to get paid, right? Okay. So first of all, don't forget to write down the currency. Now that might sound a bit weird, but if you say, okay, I'm going to make a project for you and you're going to pay me $1,000. $1,000 of what? Peanuts, potatoes, tomatoes, dollars? I mean, I've seen situations where there was a lot of miscommunication about this. Somebody thought they were going to get $1,000 and they got 1,000 rupees, right? So be careful with that. Second, how will the payment be done? Will it be a bank transfer? Will it be a PayPal? Will it be cash payment, for example? The reason why I'm saying that is some transactions cost money. If you pay somebody through PayPal, there's a fee to be paid. Now, who's going to pay the fee, the client or you? Now, if this fee is 10% and you're the one paying it, you just lost 10% of your revenue, right? So be careful with that. All right. So then what? When will you be paid? So payment term, 30 days after delivery, 60 days, 90 days. Now, there are cultural differences here, oddly enough. For example, here in Holland, it's normal to pay within 30 days of invoice. The more south or east you go, the longer it is. In Saudi Arabia, 60 days, 90 days, 120 days is not that weird. Now, keep in mind, if you've been working on something for 6 months and then you finally send your invoice to get your money, you have to wait another 3 months. That's not good, right? Okay, so then what about asking for money up front? If you have a small project that you're working on, let's say something that will cost you a day or so, right? You do the project, you send the invoice, you get your money. What if you're working on something that is going to take a long time and there's a lot of money involved? What you would do is you would say, okay, we're going to contractually agree that you're going to pay me 50% of the total amount up front, right? Then you're going to pay me 25% 3 quarters down the row, right? And then the final 25% after delivery. That way you have working capital, you can still pay your bills, and you have the buy-in or the lock-in from the client that they're actually going to pay you, right? Okay, so before we get into transfer of rights, Incoterms, and that kind of stuff, any questions about payments, about scope of work, about changes, and about fees and so forth? And while you think about that, I'm going to take a sip of coffee. Let's see. How will the contract end for a service if the client keeps on editing the original requirement that we signed in full? Well, that's what I was just talking about. I mean, if you need to define when it's done, right? If you're asking me to model a cube and I model a cube, I'm going to say, hey, I model a cube. And you're going to say, well, no, you didn't, because I don't think it's a cube. So you need to be extremely specific. What is considered the product? What is the scope of work? And be very specific about it. Talk about topology, talk about file size, talk about tessellation, talk about texture map size, be as specific as possible, right? Now, I know it's not always the case. If you're working for a huge client and you're just you, right? The client's going to say, don't bother me with these details, right? So you always need to find a balance. There's always going to be some risk for them and for you, right? And it's all about risk management, okay? All right, so no further questions on that so far? Okay. All right, now the next one, and again, this is something that I've seen people fall on their face a lot, right? And that is called transfer of rights, also known in the business as Incoterms, right? So INCO, Incoterms. Let's see. Okay, there's a question. Hang on. Will the person negotiate the price more if it's PayPal because of fees rather than cash in hand? Better to ask for upfront because no fees. Yes, of course. So if you know that fees are going to be involved, you're going to determine in the contract who's going to pay them. If you're not the one paying them, you don't care, right? If you are the one paying them, you don't want that to cut into your profit. Let's see, can you give an example of a project that you have done or someone else that lasted a month or more? Yeah, sure. There are loads of projects. But keep in mind, there's a difference between projects and contracts, right? Let's say I have a client that says, can you model, I don't know, a soap bottle for me, right? That's a project. But what if this is a steady client that gives me work month after month after month after month after month? What you would do is you would have a overall contractual agreement that basically says, whenever we are working together, these are the terms. These are the delivery dates, these are the payment terms, these are the amounts, and so forth, right? Now, When would you typically have that situation? If you, for example, are working on a feature movie or a short film or a game design, none of that stuff gets done in 2 months. It's always 4 months, 5 months, 6 months, a year, 2 years. It's different than making a model of something for somebody. That's not really a project, right? Okay, so let's go back to transfer of rights here. So you send a file to the client, right? And the client says, okay, I got what I wanted and you don't have it anymore, so why would I pay you, right? I mean, I got what I want. I'm not going to pay you. Now, keep in mind, there's a difference between possession and ownership. You can have something in your hand that's not yours, right? Now, in contract terms, when I send you something, for example, project files, they are not yours until I have received payment, because our contractual agreement says, I deliver, you pay. So by the letter of law, even though you're holding my files and you have the possession of my files, you're not the owner, right? So if you don't pay based on the agreed terms, right, I can basically get my files back. Now, it's kind of hard because how are you going to get your files back, right? You're going to go over there and knock somebody out of the way of their computer and try to download them. So what they do in digital design, for example, is they use watermarks, right? Or what they do in the 3D world is they will send a low resolution version or rendered shots with a watermark on it or whatever until the client signs off for acceptance, pays you, and then you release the final file without the watermarks. And again, if you are equal size with clients, they'll accept that, right? If you got bigger clients, right, they will not accept that because they'll think you're nuts, okay? Okay, so let's see what else. All right, so yeah, so that's Incoterms. So basically, when is there transition of ownership and risk? Okay, so and I'll give you a product example to explain this. Let's say you buy a piece of furniture from me, right? You pick it up at my house, you put it in the back of your pickup truck, you get onto the highway, you get in a crash, and the piece of furniture is completely destroyed. You come to my house and you say, I want my money back, right? Well, it doesn't work like that because I got the money, you got the product, now it's your problem, right? So that's basically what you're saying. Let's see. Princess 793, what do you mean by that question? What will bigger companies / clients accept? I don't know what you mean. Please explain. In the meantime, let's go to the next one, applicable law. Now, there's a thing called applicable law and applicable courts, right? Go back to this example that I mentioned to you guys. Let's say I'm living in the USA. I got a contract with a company in Japan. We get into a conflict, right? They're not paying me. I'm not delivering what I promised, whatever, right? So then at some point, we cannot find common ground and you have to go to court. What court? Japanese court or American court? So you need to put that in writing. You need to agree on that up front. Now, you not only need to agree on what court, but you also need to agree on what law, right? Okay, so let's see. Prince saying, when I mentioned using watermarks in the projects until you receive payment. Well, that depends. One client will accept, the other will not. It's kind of based on the relationship you have with that client. If you have a good relationship and you know they can be trusted, it'd be okay, right? Now, Hypersonic Monkey Brains is saying, sounds more trouble than it's worth. Well, that's what I said at the beginning of the session. You only do stuff like this, and this is the full blown out, very intense contract stuff, right? Normally, you wouldn't go anywhere near this unless you are working on a super huge project, super big client, super amount of money, right? In all other cases, you got a contract of 1 page or maybe not even that, right? This is just if you are in a situation where you're hired by Pixar to work on a project that's worth $250,000 and you need to work on it for the next year and a half, right? Then you definitely want to be protected. And then it is worth the trouble, okay? All right, so applicable law. All right, so next one. You all probably heard of the acronym NDA, or non-disclosure agreement. You get hired by a company that's working on a new game, and they're asking you to create a prop for that game. They don't want anybody to know about this game, right? It's top secret. They don't want to get the word out because they're afraid somebody will copy the game or whatever. So the very first meeting you walk in the door, they will have you sign an NDA. Basically, the NDA is a one-page document that says anything I hear or see during this negotiation or during the time that I'm working for you will be kept secret. And if I don't keep it secret, I will get a penalty or I will be brought to court or something like that, right? Okay, let's see, what else? All right, so confidentiality. Arbitration. Is everybody following this okay? Is it understandable? Am I explaining it okay? Okay, good. All right, so next one, arbitration. Now, for those of you who are not native English speakers, I can imagine that you might not know what that is. Basically, you sign a contract to clarify what your position is in the relationship with a business, right? Now, the last thing you want to do is go to court because court is expensive, lawyers are expensive, and you don't want any of that, right? So what you would typically do in a contract is you would put in a clause that is called arbitration. And basically, arbitration means that if you do have a conflict that you cannot solve together, you will mutually agree on a party that will kind of be a referee, right? There's going to be a neutral person that's going to listen to both sides of the situation, both sides of the story. They are going to decide who is right, and you both have to accept that, right? So that's kind of what you agree upon up front. Okay. Next one, the term of the contracts. Basically, what that means is the duration of the contracts. Now, if you have a simple situation that you need to make a model for a client, then usually the term is, okay, the model is done, you got your money, and you're done. However, if you are working on a much bigger project, let's say on a movie or a game or whatnot, then when are you exactly done? Because maybe you're not working on the entire game. Maybe you're working on parts of it or the movie, right? So you need to understand what is relevant to you. So what you write down in the term of the agreement is what the initial term of the agreement is, when it ends, and whether it will automatically renew or not, right? So let me take that situation where you've been working for the same client for years, right? And every month or so you get some work and you work on it and you get paid and then whatever. And as an agreement between the two, there's a contract saying whenever we work together, if you send an invoice, I'll pay it within 30 days. That's kind of a contract, right? Now, you had to put a term in there because that piece of paper is not going to be legally binding forever. It's going to have an end date, right? So what you would do is you put in there, this contract is signed on January 1st, 2019, and it will automatically end on December 31st, 2019. And if not canceled in writing, it will automatically renew for 1 year, right? And that way, you always have the opportunity to cancel it in writing. If you don't, it will automatically extend. Easy peasy, right? Okay, do you need a new contract for every project? Well, I basically already answered that. If it's a small project and it's low risk, then no. If you have a contract like the one I just explained, then no either, because you can work under that existing one, right? Let's see. LOL is talking a lot of rubbish, so I'm just going to ignore that. Let's see. We're going to go to termination of contract. So what if you want to end a contract? You've been working with the client, you have a contract in place, you know there's a deadline or an end date, right? So let's say December 31st, and you want to cancel it. Now, First of all, you need to know the terms of cancellation. Do you need to do it in writing? Do you need to give them notice? And how long is that notice? Do you need to sign something in writing 3 months in advance? Because if you go to them on December 30th and cancel it, you're probably too late. So if you are concerned about stuff like this, both ways, you need to do that. Now, cancellation of contracts like this, they only apply to like overall contracts and almost never for contract for work. If you're working on, let's say, modeling a character and they want to cancel the contract midway while you're still working on it, they need to have very good legal reason for that because you did work and you want to get paid, right? Okay, let's see. Okay, so the next one, which is kind of interesting. It's called force majeure. And I'm just curious, who ever heard of that? Okay, I'm not seeing anybody come in that quick, so I'm just going to go and explain that. Well, force majeure basically means something like, okay, Martin's saying heard it in high school. Wouldn't be able to tell you. All right, it's a movie. Yeah, right. Force majeure basically roughly translates to act of God, meaning that something happened out of your control. You promised to deliver the work, but your company burned down, or you had an accident, or you're in the hospital, or whatever. Something that is out of your control that prevents you from delivering what you're supposed to deliver in the contract, right? So basically what you can say is, well, it's not my fault, so they can't give you a penalty, right? You said, okay, I'm going to deliver everything by September 1st. You get a car accident, you're going to miss that deadline, right? Now, in case of force majeure, what they typically do, and you have a section in the contract called that, right? You write down what you do in that situation. Something like, okay, we'll give you an additional few weeks, or we have the right to hire another 3D artist for the duration that you're out sick, something like that. So basically, and this works two ways. What if you have been working on this project for months, expecting payment, and their company blows up or burns down or whatever? Where are you going to get your money from, right? So again, this will protect you as well as them, okay? All right, so instead of force majeure, let's say you default, meaning that you cannot deliver at all, or they cannot pay at all. Then what, right? Now, when a party defaults, the other party must give them a fair period by court, right, to fix the problem. So let's say you delivered all the work, right, and they're supposed to pay you within 30 days. Now, you waited 30 days, you still don't have any money, right? You call them and they tell you, well, I'm sorry, but we're Chapter 11, we're in bankruptcy, but maybe we're going to do a restart, something like that, right? So in that case, they're defaulting, and you need to give them a fair period to fix the problem before you go to court, right? So you cannot say, well, you're 1 day late with your payment, so I'm going to take you to court. You can't do that because you described what default means. And this works for you as well, right? If you are late providing the model or whatever you promised to do, same situation. All right. Okay, now this one is one that you need to be careful with, and especially when you're working with big companies. They might put something in the contract called penalties. Let's say, and I'll take an extreme example here. Let's say you're working for Disney Pixar on Toy Story 5, whatever. And they already spent $10 million on the grand opening promotion or whatever, and you are working on a critical piece of that movie. If you default, so you're not in time to deliver, and you basically fail to deliver, then you might get a huge financial penalty, right? And that's something to be really careful with. Now, this is an extreme example. Normally, you wouldn't see this unless you're working with very large companies on very large projects. But that said, it might be interesting for you if you are working with clients of this size to get an insurance, right? and to have an insurance that will protect you against something like this, right? Because you can go bankrupt in one day, right? Okay, next one, point of contact. And I hear this a lot. People have a project, they're working for a client, and then they talk to person A who says, I want this and that and so and so. Then they get called by person B who says, I want something completely different. And you're confused, right? So you're saying, okay, well, who's the boss here? And who's deciding what? And who should I listen to? So what you put in the contract is, who is your point of contact? Who is responsible? Who can decide on what is relevant for you or not, right? Okay, quick question. Let me know if you got any questions about this before I move forward. Okay, Emma saying, can I repeat point of contact? Yes, so you're in contact with the company. You agreed that you would do a certain amount of work, and you have always been talking to James, right? And James says, I want the prop to be green. You get a call from Susan who says, I want it to be red. And you're confused. Who are you supposed to listen to, right? So you need to put into the contract, who is the person that decides on changes and whatnot, okay? Right, I'm going to speed things up a little bit, guys, because we still have a lot to go through, and I'll try to do it a bit quicker. I don't want this to go on forever, but like I said, it's one time only, so bear with me. I think it's important. I hope you agree, right? Okay, so let's see. We talked about point of contact, performance reporting. I talked about this before. How often do you communicate where you're at as far as working, right? You communicate to your contact person, this is my progress for the last week, and so forth, right? The next one, IP rights or intellectual property. Who owns what you make, right? So let's say you created an original design, right? It's your design, it's your model, and you sold that to them. When you sell it to them, does it become their property, their model, their design, or do you get a royalty? I'll give you an example. If you're working for Pixar and you design Buzz Lightyear, it's theirs. If you're a third-party contractor and you get contracted to come up with a design, you can potentially put in a contract saying, well, this is an original design, it's mine. If you're going to use this, I want a percentage, right? A royalty, okay? Let's see, use of information. So what can be used in what fashion and for how long? You're going to your client's building and you're seeing a lot of stuff, you're hearing a lot of stuff, and some of it you can use while you're working on the project, but not once you leave the building and once the project is done, okay? Right, we got a couple of shorter things here, and I want to go through them pretty quickly so I can answer some questions for you guys, right? Okay, so taxes. When you offer quotation to a client, make sure you write down whether all taxes are included or not. And if you got different countries, one between the other, who is responsible for taxes, where are taxes going to be paid, and it's kind of the same thing with the fees that I talked about before, right? So be careful with that. Insurance, like I said before, if you need insurance because you potentially have to pay for penalties or whatnot, or because of force majeure, because you can't complete the project because you're in the hospital or whatever, you need to protect yourself and your business from, exposure, right? Right, severability, kind of an important one. Let's say you want to get out of a contract, right? You got a contract signed with another party, and what you will do is you will go through that contract to see if you can find anything, even one word, that is illegal and is not allowed in the contract. And you're going to say, well, there's something in the contract that's not legal, therefore the contract's not legal. Well, severability says if one part of the contract is illegal, that does not make the rest of the contract illegal. That's kind of a protection, okay? All right, almost there, guys. Right of entry. let's say you're working for a big company, you get a pass to get into the building, you can use their copier, their printer, you can sit there and work and whatnot. That's going to end when you're done, right? So you describe in the contract how long do you have access and when does that end, and vice versa. They might want to walk into your building or your workspace to see what your progress is, because you promised them the world and they're not hearing anything from you and they want to be, informed. Okay. All right. So protection on software. Some companies will say, I want you to put in writing that you are not using illegal software, because illegal software is exposure and that can give exposure to them, right? All right, almost there. Transferability. Let's say you signed a contract with, I don't know, again, Nike, and you sell your business to your next door neighbor who knows nothing about 3D, but you sold it, right? Does the client need to accept that? No. You can put in writing saying that you cannot move that contract from one to the other. And the same applies for the company. If Nike gets bought by Adidas while you're working on a contract, you can put in writing based on this that as soon as that happens, the contract is no longer legal and you can get out of it, right? Okay, let's see. 3 more to go, guys. Work done by others. Let's say you hire a third-party 3D artist to help you, right? Will that person be a part of the contract? Who's responsible for that person? You or both of the parties, right? So you put that in writing. And let's see. Then finally, you sign the contract. You put down the place, the date, and the signatures of all parties. And when you're talking about people representing the companies, it is the name of the company, the title of the person working there, their name, and their signature. Because if that person leaves the company and some other person takes that role, you have a contract with the role, not the person. And above the role with the company, not the role, right? Okay, guys. Well, that's all I wanted to cover. So it's question time. Sorry for all the talking. It's a lot of stuff to cover, and there's a lot more to cover, but I can't do that in one go. So let's see. Have you covered this? Imagine I've been working on a long-term project unpaid. The project has recently required investment. It's appropriate for me to acquire a contract or back pay for intellectual property, and etc. Let me see if I understand the question here. Shrik Saha, stop repeating the same question, please, or I will block you, right? Okay, so working long-term project unpaid. Well, first of all, why would you work long-term unpaid? Like I said, that's exposure. Second, the project has recently acquired investment. Is it appropriate for me to request a contract? I would definitely make an issue of getting paid one way or the other, right? Whether it is contractual, whether it is financial. Okay, Shrik Saha, you are now gone. Hang on, guys. I'm just going to get this guy out of the way. Okay, so I would make an issue of that. I would definitely address that. And in future, I would definitely not work a long time without payment, okay? Okay, Martin says, can I talk about some unpleasant situations I had with contracts and how I dealt with them? Yes, I got a request from a very, very, very large cell phone company, one of the biggest in the world. And they basically said that it was an extreme deadline. They only had 1 week and it needed to be done. And I need to come over on a Sunday, and I did all that. And they asked me, is it possible to do? And I said, well, yes, I believe it is. But there's no time for a contract because it was just 1 week. We didn't want to spend days going on and on about the contract and whatever. And then I said, well, if you want me to get this done in a week, then I need to have all the specifications right now, right? I need to know exactly what you want, what it should look like, how it should work, and so forth. So I drove over there on a Sunday. On Monday, still nothing was there. On Tuesday, still nothing was there. And I was saying it's becoming increasingly impossible to get this done. And, the deadline of next week it became impossible, right? And basically they said, well, that's very unprofessional. We don't want to work with you anymore. And I said, fine, bye. Right? I mean, it doesn't matter whether they're huge or not. Companies that don't want to pay you, I can find them everywhere, right? So I kind of got cautious with that, and it's mostly about reputation anyway. Let's see, has any company defaulted on any significant payments? What action did you take? Well, the thing is, because of my contractual background, and I've been dealing with international contracts for a very long time, I don't put myself in that position. I do know people that have been in that position, and unfortunately, most of them basically never got their money, because that's the risk of being a solo freelance artist. It's better to protect yourself up front than trying to get the money afterwards. If they are serious about working with you, they are fine with the fact that you want to get paid on time, right? If they start arguing that they want to postpone your payments and all that stuff to begin with, why work with them? Let's see. So, Good Games asking, is there anything significant that I could recap? Well, I don't recall exactly what I discussed the first 20 minutes, so that's going to be kind of hard. Let's see. Am I aware of Scrum Poker? And is that a legitimate defining scope of work? I must say I've never heard of that, and I've been around a long time. I've never heard of that. I do recall one question that I didn't answer about a team contract, especially when you're doing a collaboration. That can be kind of important, because when you're working on something as a team and you want to benefit from payments or result as a team, what you very often see is that some people will work more and harder than others. And as a result, you kind of get friction in the team, right? So again, when it comes to scope of work, you need to be very, very, very specific about what is expected from whom and what the penalties are if people don't, carry their weight. Okay, can you reuse an original piece or resell even if you've made for a company? Well, that depends on the contract. Depends on the rights I talked about. The transfer of ownership, the transfer of rights, and the ownership of intellectual property. If you, let's say, if you modeled a 3D table, right, and somebody gives you $10 and says, give me that table, and then you sell it to somebody else and somebody else and somebody else, you can do that, right? If they commission you to make that table specifically for them and exclusively for them, then you cannot. If they commission you to make that exclusively for them and you deliver the file and they never pay you, right, then they don't have any legal grounds to claim that exclusive behavior, and you can just go on and sell it, right? Okay. Let's see. A question about where clients come from. Well, that's not really a contractual thing, but network, mostly networking. Okay, guys, I'm trying to wrap it up. Let's do maybe one or two more questions, and then we've been going for an hour and 15 minutes. So let's see. Emma's saying, if you write down a contract and have both parties signed, is the document official, or do you need to send it somewhere to make it official, or is it good? If you abide by everything I just talked about, so you make sure that both parties have signed it, have declared in writing who they are, what their position is. You have a scope of work, you have a description of what needs to be delivered and what needs to be paid and all the terms and all that, right? It's basically a legal document. Now, there's no need for you to go and have that notarized somewhere, unless it's something like a last will or a testament or something like that. But when it comes to a business contract, if the content of the agreement is legally binding and both parties have a copy signed by both parties, you have a legal agreement. Okay, guys, one more question. You're welcome, Emma. Let's see. Okay, so Sky is asking me what my PayPal is, and I always love that when people ask me that. So there you go. Okay, one more question, guys. Somebody have a good, juicy question? One more? I guess there's no more questions coming. Maybe somebody's typing, so I'll just hang on one sec. And just in case, let's see. Okay, this is not really a contract question, but okay. So what did big companies look for in 3D artists? Well, besides the obvious, which is quality of work and so forth, big companies tend to have big teams that work in a pipeline, right? So you become a part of their pipeline, and for them, besides quality of work, reliability is extremely important. I mean, if your work is fantastic, but you are as sketchy as I don't know what, and you don't show up, and you're late, and you're, I don't know, drunk or whatever, you're not reliable, and they don't want to work with you, right? So especially with big companies, do what you say what you do, and make sure you deliver good work, right? Now, I'm going to give you guys one link quickly. If you just hang on one sec. And before we sign off, I'm going to give you guys this link right here. Now, this is the link to my Patreon page. And the reason why I'm doing that is because this session will not be available on YouTube after it's done. It's only going to be available to my patrons. So if you guys want to become a patron, and you can do that, $5 a month, you get early access to new videos, you get live streams, you get shared documents and files and whatnot, and all that kind of cool stuff, right? So let's see. Final question. Okay, Emily, what do you do if somebody accuses you of stealing their idea? How do you prevent people from stealing your work as their own, right? Now, it kind of depends. It's usually related to traceability, right? So if you had an idea, you put it down somewhere, and especially with social media, if you posted it online somewhere, let's say on Etsy or ArtStation or whatever, and you see that somebody made a model based off of your concept work, based on posting data online, you can prove that it's yours because you did it first. Now, if you made something truly unique and you want to have more protection than that, and you don't want to go down the copyright route, which is, very elaborate and expensive, what you would do instead is, and this is kind of the trick of the trade, you would put it in writing, right? You print it out, the designs or whatever, you stick it in an envelope, you close the envelope, you put your signature on the glue line so you can see whether the seal is broken or not. And then you go to a notary public and you have them date and timestamp that envelope, right? So whenever, let's say 4 years down the line, somebody steals your idea, you can go to the notary and have that opened by the notary with their date and timestamp on it. And you have 100% legal proof to court that you were first, right? Okay, guys, well, that's it for me. It was a very long session. Like I said, a one time and a one time only. It's, kind of a heavy one this time. But hopefully it was good for you guys. And thank you so much for sticking around all this time. And I'll see you guys in the next one. All right. Okay, guys. Well, thank you so much. It's time to get a fresh cup of coffee and see you guys next time. Bye.